Good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation, all of you who were involved in that, because it's wonderful to see so many people interested in this topic. I have learned that it is much easier to begin a conversation about something like outcomes assessment with agreement about terms. There can be lots of unproductive wrangling over terms if we're not clear. So I think in terms of broad themes, something like communication skills, then goals or principles at a second level, and that could be the subset of communication skills, oral skills, and finally objectives or outcomes or competences. And all of these terms are kind of interchangeable. And at that level, it might be an effective oral defense of a research proposal. So there is making an effective defense. That's the objective level. Now, I must say that as I am thinking about my own field of outcomes assessment, I know how important setting learning outcomes is, but I don't usually talk very much about that. In fact, let me show you what I usually do say in an hour presentation. I say that most of us are not trained as teachers and certainly not as assessors. And so we need professional development to help us write clear objectives or student learning outcomes, and then individualize instruction, and then develop assessment tools that test higher order intellectual skills. And then I move into this wonderfully simple Bloom's taxonomy, which has been revised in many ways over these years, but it simply shows that there are various levels of cognitive complexity, and a verb can be attached at each of these levels. To simply know something, that means you identify or describe it, all the way to demonstrating and solving at the application level, and then criticizing and concluding at the evaluation level. So if you can begin your learning outcome with an action verb, then that tells you at what level of complexity the response should be shaped. And it's really helpful to have a verb to begin a learning outcome. And then I say that if you have started with a verb, it almost dictates what the assessment measure will be. If you want students to speak, you will ask them to make a speech. And if you want them to find information, you will give them a project that will give them the opportunity to find information. And then I rely on my wonderful colleagues in the School of Nursing who have been at this longer than anyone other discipline at my institution, at least. So the Indiana University Master of Science in Nursing has specific outcomes about modeling leadership at the application level, synthesizing knowledge, demonstrating inquiry, another application, and then specifying and measuring outcomes, which I will call at the evaluation level. So action verbs, nice examples. And then here is the culminating experience for all of this, putting it into a matrix, which I love to do. General outcome, again, oral presentation skills. How would you know it if you saw it? That's where you say the student would defend orally a research presentation. And then very important column, how will students learn it? Because sometimes we say we're going to teach critical thinking or oral communication skills, and it's not in the curriculum anywhere. It's not in our class assignments or in our tests. So that's an important step. And then how could you measure the desired behaviors? That's where the verb tells you that the assessment measure is a speech. And then what are the findings, and what improvements are you going to make on the findings? On the basis of what you learn, how can you be guided by what you learn? And so this kind of organizes everything for me, and I'm ready to go to talk about methods, and I've really glossed over learning outcomes. So I've needed to come back and to think about the learning outcomes more carefully. And of course, they're at different levels, starting at the course level, then moving up to the program level, and then the institution level. And I have often used this to show that assessment occurs at various levels, always beginning with the individual student in a classroom, and looking across students, you can get ideas about what goes on at a classroom level. So the student learning outcomes can be at the individual student level, at the classroom level, the discipline level, if it's several departments that make up a college or a unit within a campus. All of these levels, provincial level, national level, there can be student learning outcomes and are statements of outcomes at all those levels. So today, our introducers have said that we'll be looking at uses of outcomes in at least 4 ways: to design courses and design programs, and then to review quality and to facilitate transfer. So I began to look at my own experience, and the first thing I thought about was, yes, we spent from 1990 to 1998 on our campus coming up with these 6 goals or principles that underlie our general education program at Indiana University-Purdue University, Indianapolis. And they were revised in 2007, but no one wants to go back through that 8-year process again. So we have these 6 principles. We have said that every course from the 100 level through to the 400 level should emphasize 1, 2, or 3 of these so that students have multiple opportunities to learn the learning outcomes that are associated with these broad goals. At the program level, that communication skills might be translated to an outcome that says to express ideas and facts to others effectively in a variety of formats: written, oral, and visual. So taking the campus level goal and coming up with a more specific outcome at the program level. Now, I have been so pleased over the last 5 years to see that our student affairs professionals have adapted the principles of undergraduate learning to be enactable in their own activities. They have student employees at the campus center, in residence halls, and as tutors. And they say now that each of these programs will have several learning outcomes for students. These are activities that take place outside the classroom, but they are letting the students know that these learning outcomes are important and they are enacted in certain ways, and then they are assessed on these. And in addition to the 6 principles, the student affairs professionals have added number 7 and 8. Number 7, intrapersonal development. An outcome there would be to analyze their own strengths. And then interpersonal development, there an outcome would be to cultivate healthy relationships with others. Then I think about review. Here's the look at quality assurance, reviewing courses or programs. And some steps in doing that would be to look at the syllabus, to see if the outcomes are listed there, to look at assignments, to see if the assignment is actually measuring the outcome that we want to achieve. Looking at assessment criteria, are they sufficiently high, sufficiently rigorous? And then what about the uses made of assessment findings? Uses are rare, and we need to do a much better job of using the assessment findings. We'll talk more about that later this afternoon. If one were interested in sort of a comprehensive look at program outcomes, This is our registrar's site, which has student learning outcomes for every degree program at the undergraduate level and at the master's level. And so if you are interested, I think you'll have access to my slides and you can check out that website. I'm so glad we have students with us this morning because students have a big interest in, and of course the learning outcomes first can be used to help them structure their learning. It gives them goals to work toward. And by giving the students grades or marks, we're giving them evidence of their achievement, and they have an opportunity to identify their own strengths and weaknesses. So very important goals for learning outcomes for students. We hear a lot these days about badges and even now a stamp, which is on your way to getting a badge. And so this is another way that students can mark their progress in learning outcomes. And then a transcript, and there may be a co-curricular transcript as well as a curricular transcript showing what activities the students have been engaged in outside class that really give an employer an even better look at what students know and can do. Another way in which student learning outcomes are front and center these days is competence-based education. This is sort of the latest thing in the United States, but it's just coming back, as so many of our things do. We go in cycles. Empire State College has been doing this for at least 30 years, basing student progress and degree attainment on what students actually know and can do, their learning outcomes. Western Governors University is online, and they've been at this for over a decade. Again, progress is based on achievement of learning outcomes, very specifically. And most recently, the University of Southern New Hampshire has made a name for itself with its learning outcome-oriented degree programs. I think about my friends in England who are very interested in a national survey of student satisfaction. And students indicate their satisfaction or lack thereof with the grading process, the marking that they get. And so they want to see prompt feedback, and they're interested in good assessment methods that are strictly connected to learning outcomes. So in England, it is very much an individual student-oriented look at learning outcomes. While in Europe, with the Bologna process, it's a much more systemic kind of process where the process is aimed at facilitating transfer from one university to another, but also from one country to another, and ensuring that the credentials for an engineer in one country are going to be pretty comparable to the credentials for an engineer in another country. So Bologna and the tuning process designed to harmonize student learning outcomes across countries. At our own College of Engineering at IUPUI, we have a joint degree program with Butler University, a local liberal arts college, and so students in 5 years can get their degree from Butler in liberal arts and also a degree in engineering from IUPUI, and the basis of transfer is student learning outcomes. Quality Matters is a set of standards for evaluating online courses. So here's another quality assessment activity that can be guided by learning outcomes. Does the course design meet specified learning outcomes? Very important question within Quality Matters. And students should be involved in this whole process. They can help us state learning outcomes in ways that students can understand and relate to. Students can help us design measures and define levels of learning. Finally, I was in a meeting about a month ago on my campus, and I found that learning outcomes can have consequences. We had a group reporting to us, a subcommittee of our undergraduate curriculum committee. There had been a remonstrance, we call it. Public health faculty had proposed 7 biostatistics courses. They had done a very good job of laying out what they wanted the students to learn. They had very specific learning outcomes and how the students were going to learn those. And the math department said, we offer a courses very much like these 7 that you're thinking of offering. And of course, we want more students in our classes, so let us offer the courses, and you send your students to us to take them. Well, the math department either didn't have student learning outcomes written or failed to produce them. And on that basis, public health faculty now are able to teach these 7 biostatistics courses for their students. So, consequences for learning outcomes.
Thanks, Trudy. And on that note, as we indicated, we're just going to take 5 minutes at the end of each speaker to ask questions of clarification. And then there's the opportunity to ask other questions in the small group. So are there any questions particular questions of Trudy at this stage?
I can bring you a microphone if you have a question.
Okay.
Are there any mathematicians here?
Okay. Well, not seeing any. Thanks very much, Trudy, for getting us started in that great way. And I'll pass it over to Sandy Welsh to talk about why learning outcomes.